I always thought that my left ear let me down because I am left-handed. 27 years at a grinding machine. And here's the result. Half the world now sounds muffled to me as if through cotton wool. Dr. Levinsky says it's occupational hazard. Not surprising for someone who's worked with industrial machinery for more than a quarter of a century. I nod to him every time I see him at the reception desk and think that maybe it's for the best. At 65, not everything is worth hearing. Paxton isn't my real last name. It's my late husband Walter's surname. My maiden name is Radley, Gwendolyn Radley, daughter of a shoemaker from Oklahoma who came to conquer Rockford in 1978. Conquer is a strong word. More like surviving, scraping by with odd jobs until I met Walter at the Blue Step factory. He was hired as a master craftsman, and I was taken on as an apprentice pattern maker. That's how I learned the art of making shoe lasts, a job that has now been replaced by machines and computers. But back then, it was pure magic, turning flat pieces of leather into products that fit the human foot perfectly. "Grandma, you're daydreaming again." Lynette's voice brings me back to reality. My granddaughter, a 9-year-old girl, is standing in the doorway of my room with a book. "Mom says dinner will be ready in 20 minutes, and it's your turn to do the dishes." "Thank you, sweetheart," I reply, closing the old photo album. "What are you doing?" "My science homework." "We have to draw a food chain," she says, wrinkling her nose. "It's boring." I glance at the clock. It's 5:30. I still have time to help her. "Come on, sit down," I say, patting the bed next to me, the only free space in my tiny room, which used to be a storage closet. Now there's barely enough room for a bed, a nightstand, and a narrow wardrobe. We had to give away or throw out the rest when Garrick and his family moved in with me 3 years ago. "Temporary," he said at the time, "until we get back on our feet." Lynette sits down next to me, and we work on her homework together. She's a smart girl, but restless, just like her father. Garrick couldn't sit still for more than 15 minutes either. When we're done, she hugs me and runs off, forgetting her book. Typical. I leave the room to help with dinner. Our apartment on the second floor of an old brick building on the outskirts of Rockford isn't spacious, but for a single woman, it was just right. 3 rooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, everything you need. Now that there are 5 of us, every inch counts. In the kitchen, Merritt is cutting vegetables for a salad with quick, nervous movements. My sister-in-law is 37, but she looks 45, the result of constant dissatisfaction with life. Her chestnut-colored hair is pulled back into a messy bun, and her makeup-free face looks tired. "There you are," she says without looking at me. "You can do the potatoes." It's not a question, so I silently take the bag of potatoes and start peeling them. Merritt and I work side by side without talking. It's easier that way for both of us. I know that my mere presence annoys her. To her, I'm a living reminder that she and Garrick couldn't support themselves. "You spilled the salt again," I hear her mutter when I knock the shaker with my elbow. "You're like a child, honestly." I pretend not to hear her. In 3 years, I've learned to let comments like that roll off my back, the healthy ones and the hurtful ones. Walter called it my superpower, the ability to not react to barbs. "You're like a rubber ball, Gwenny, he used to say. "You bounce off everything." Oren, my oldest grandson, walks in. At 14, he's already a head taller than me, skinny, with perpetually tousled dark hair and eyes glued to his phone screen. "Mom, can I eat in my room? I have a conference call with the guys on the project in 10 minutes. "No, Oren," Merritt cuts him off. "We eat together as a family. Your project can wait." Oren rolls his eyes but doesn't argue. Instead, he notices me. "Hi, Grandma. What's for dinner?" "Chicken cutlets with mashed potatoes," I reply, smiling. Oren and I have always had a good relationship, at least we did before we moved. Now he's becoming more and more withdrawn, preferring the company of his phone to real conversation. "Again?" He grimaces. "We had cutlets on Monday." "What do you want, steak every day?" Merritt snaps back. "You can't exactly go wild on your father's salary and your grandmother's pension." I see Oren glance at me quickly and know what he's thinking. Grandma's pension again. Another hint that I'm a burden. Although my pension is the only stable income in the family since Garrick lost his job at the car dealership and has been getting by with odd jobs. "Go get your father," Merritt tells her son. He's in the garage tinkering with his junk. Oren nods and leaves. The junk is Garrick's old Ford, which he has been trying unsuccessfully to restore for over a year, another dream that is unlikely to come true. When the potatoes are ready, I start heating up the cutlets, taking them out of the refrigerator. They really are leftovers from Monday. I cook in advance to save money. Meredith finds this annoying. She thinks I'm doing it on purpose to emphasize their financial difficulties. "Gwen," she says suddenly, and I flinch at the surprise. Meredith rarely calls me by my name. Usually it's just she or grandma, even when she's talking about me in the third person in my presence. "Could you watch Lynette tomorrow? I have a job interview." "Of course," I say automatically. "What time?" "From 10 to 2, maybe longer. It's downtown at Rising Sun." Rising Sun is a fashionable clothing boutique. Merritt has long dreamed of working there, believing that with her taste she could become a stylist. I nod, though I doubt anything will come of it. Over the past year, she has gone to dozens of interviews, all to no avail. "What's going on from 10 to 2? Garrick asks as he enters the kitchen. My son looks tired, with dark circles under his eyes and his hands covered in machine oil. At 40, he's already starting to go bald like his father. "I have a job interview tomorrow, Pam," Merritt replies emphatically. "I told you last week." "Oh, right." Garrick rubs his forehead, leaving a dark mark. "Sorry, I forgot. Hi, Mom." "Hi, son." I hand him a wet towel for his hands. "How's the car?" "Not good," he sighs. "It needs a new pump, and that's another $200. "Which we don't have," Merritt interjects. "Maybe it's time to admit defeat and sell that piece of junk for parts?" "It's not a piece of junk." Garrick's voice tightens. "It's a classic '69 model. Restored, it'll be worth 3 times what I paid for it." "If you ever get it restored," Merritt retorts. "In the meantime, it's just eating up money." I silently set the table, habitually ignoring their bickering. These conversations happen almost every evening. It used to hurt me to see them argue, but now I just tune out. Besides, I can't really hear some of what they say because of my ear. "Dinner's ready," I announce, setting the plates on the table. "Lynette, Oren, dinner's on." We sit down at the cramped kitchen table. I used to always sit at the head of the table. That was my place since Walter's time. Now Garrick sits there, and I sit to the side, between Lynette and the wall. It's cramped, but I'm used to it. "How was your day at school?" I ask my grandchildren, trying to ease the tension. "Fine," Oren shrugs. "Nothing special." "I had a great day," Lynette interrupts. "Mrs. Howard praised my drawing and hung it on the honor board." "Well done," I smile at her. "You've always been good at drawing." "Who does she take after?" Merritt snorts. "Certainly not her father. He can't even draw a straight line." "But I can fix things," Garrick replies, trying to joke. "Well, at least you used to be able to." "Lynette takes after my mother," Merritt says proudly. "She was an artist, too. She could have had a career if she hadn't gotten married." I chew my cutlet silently. Merritt's mother's story is one of those family legends that grows more detailed with each passing year. As far as I know, Merritt's mother worked in an art store and sometimes painted watercolor postcards to sell. But in Merritt's version, she's practically a second Frida Kahlo, sacrificing her career for her family. "Speaking of careers," Garrick turns to me. "Mom, have you thought about going back to work, at least part-time?" I look up from my plate in surprise. I wasn't expecting that question. "At my age, who needs an old shoe designer when machines do everything?" "Well, maybe not in a factory." Garrick waves his fork vaguely. "Maybe private commissions? I hear handmade stuff is back in fashion now." "With your hands?" Merritt interjects, looking at my arthritis-twisted fingers. "Who would trust you with their expensive leather?" "My hands still work fine," I reply calmly, though inside I'm cringing. Merritt knows where to hit. "But I don't think now is the right time to start a new business." "Just a thought," Garrick shrugs. "Some extra money wouldn't hurt, that's what it is. Money again. My pension isn't enough, now they want me to work at 65. I look at my son and realize with bitterness that I don't recognize the tired, broken man in front of me as the energetic boy Walter and I raised. "I'll think about it," I reply curtly. "Maybe I'll contact some old acquaintances at the factory and see what the order situation is like." "Great idea," Garrick nods, clearly pleased that I didn't refuse outright. Merritt just snorts but says nothing. She knows that the chances of finding a job at my age and with my qualifications are practically zero. The rest of dinner passes in relative silence. After dinner, I wash the dishes as usual, while Merritt puts Lynette to bed and Garrick returns to the garage. Orrin locks himself in his room with his computer. When the kitchen is sparkling clean, Merritt is picky about such things, I return to my little room. I sit down on the bed and pull an old notebook from under my pillow. It's a kind of diary I've been keeping since Walter died. Nothing special. Just notes about everyday things, thoughts, memories, a way to stay sane when it feels like the whole world has gone mad. Today, Garrick asked me to come back to work, I write. I wonder what Walter would have said. He probably would have supported me. He always said my hands were made for creating, not washing dishes. I put the notebook down and freeze, listening. I can hardly hear anything with my left ear, but my right ear picks up a slight vibration on the floor. Someone is walking down the hallway. A moment later, I see a shadow flicker under the door. A few seconds later, I feel a slight breeze. The front door has opened and closed. I didn't hear a slam. I never have since the problem with my ear started. But years of experience have taught me to notice other signs. Changes in air pressure, movement of shadows, vibrations in the floor. Small clues that add up to a picture of what's happening. Garrick must have come back from the garage. I can't hear him talking to Merritt in the living room, just a faint hum of voices through the wall. If I press my right ear against the wall, I can make out a few words, but I stopped doing that a long time ago. I won't hear anything good anyway. Instead, I feel the floor vibrate slightly to the rhythm of the bass. Garrick has turned on the TV. He always turns the volume up louder than necessary, as if to compensate for my deafness throughout the apartment. Or maybe he's just trying to drown out his own thoughts. At moments like these, when the sounds of the world reach me, distorted or not at all, I feel my isolation particularly keenly. My family lives their life behind the wall, and I live mine in a tiny room, surrounded by silence I didn't choose. Sometimes, on particularly difficult days, I deliberately turn my left ear toward the door so I can't hear their conversations. At times like these, my partial deafness seems like a blessing. I take Walter's photo out of the nightstand. He smiles at me with that special smile that was meant only for me. "What would you do in my place, dear?" I ask silently. The photo is silent, but I know the answer. Walter never tolerated disrespect. "Your house, your rules," he liked to say. But now it's not my apartment anymore. It's Garrick and Merritt's apartment, where all I have left is a tiny room and the role of a free babysitter and cook. Another argument begins behind the wall. I can't make out the words, only the intonations, Merritt's sharp voice and Garrick's low, tired reply. I cover my good ear with a pillow and close my eyes. Tomorrow will be a new day. Maybe tomorrow I'll find the strength to change something. Or maybe I'll just keep drifting along as I have for the last 3 years. After all, at my age, it's too late to start a revolution. But somewhere deep inside me, in that quiet corner of my soul, where neither Merritt's barbs, nor Garrick's disillusionment with life, nor my own fatigue can penetrate, a tiny spark smolders. A spark that once made me leave my parents' home in Oklahoma and set off into the unknown. A spark that helped me become the best dressmaker in the factory, despite the men's ridicule. A spark that made me get up every day and keep on living even after Walter died. Maybe it's not too late to fan that spark into a flame. People think that when you can't hear well, you just miss words and phrases. But that's not true. The world becomes a mystery, a puzzle where you have to piece together the missing parts of a conversation from lips, gestures, and facial expressions. Sometimes I feel like I've become much more attentive to details since my left ear stopped working. I notice things I didn't pay attention to before. How Merritt presses her lips together when I enter the room. How Garrick avoids looking me in the eye. How Orrin sighs when I ask him to repeat himself. Today is Friday, cleaning day. Merritt insists that once a week the apartment should shine as if we were expecting the queen. It's not like anyone's coming over. Merritt doesn't have any friends, and Garrick's coworkers aren't exactly eager to hang out in our cramped apartment. But a ritual is a ritual. I'm dusting the living room when Merritt's phone rings on the coffee table. She's in the bathroom, the water's running. She obviously can't hear it. I pick up the phone. The screen displays Caleb. It's Merritt's brother. "Merritt, phone!" I shout, but she can't hear me over the noise of the water. I decide to take the phone to the bathroom door, but on the way, I accidentally touch the screen and the message opens. "The realtor is coming on Tuesday at noon. Make sure the old lady isn't home. Janine says apartments in this neighborhood are worth a lot right now." I freeze, rereading the message. Realtor? What realtor? And why doesn't Merritt want me to be home? The water in the bathroom stops running. I quickly put the phone back on the table and go back to dusting, my heart pounding like crazy. A minute later, Merritt appears, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet. "You had a call," I say, trying to sound normal. "Your phone is on the table." "Oh, okay," she says, picking up the phone and checking the screen. "Oh, it's Caleb. I'll call him back later." I nod and continue dusting the bookshelf, pretending to be completely absorbed in cleaning. Inside, my mind is racing with questions. Why are she and her brother discussing the price of an apartment? My apartment. And why did she call me old lady? I can't get that message out of my head all day. At lunch, I watch Merritt, trying to figure out what she's up to. But she's acting normal, complaining about the neighbors upstairs, discussing bills with Garrick, scolding Orrin for the mess in his room. In the evening, when the children are asleep and Garrick is in the garage, I hear Merritt talking on the phone. Or rather, I see her walking around the living room with the phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. I can't make out the words. She's speaking quietly, and even with my good ear, I can only hear someone if they're right in front of me. But from her gestures and the way she keeps glancing in the direction of my room, I can tell that the conversation is about me. On Saturday morning, Garrick announces that he is going to the flea market to look for parts for his Ford. Merritt decides to go with him, taking the children. "Maybe you should come with us, Mom," Garrick suggests. "You'll get some fresh air." "No thanks," I reply. "I have laundry to do today and my legs are aching." "As you wish." He shrugs, but I see relief in his eyes. Taking along a mother who is hard of hearing and slow to walk is no picnic. When they leave, I sit down on the sofa in the living room and feel like I can breathe freely for the first time in a long time. No one looks at me with irritation. No one sighs when I ask them to repeat themselves. No one pretends I'm not there. My gaze falls on Merritt's tablet, forgotten on the coffee table. She always protects it with a password, but now the screen is lit up. She must not have had time to lock it before she left. I've never been nosy, never gone through other people's things. Walter could leave his wallet, his phone, anything. I wouldn't even touch it. But now something is pushing me to check what's on that tablet. I open the browser history. The last searches: cost of an apartment in Rockford, real estate appraisal, how to prove an elderly person is incapacitated, guardianship of parents with dementia. I feel like I've been doused with ice water. Dementia? Guardianship? Does Merritt consider me incompetent? I check my email. Among the latest messages, I find correspondence with a lawyer. Merritt is wondering if she can become her husband's mother's guardian, if she can prove that she is incapable of making decisions on her own. The lawyer replies that the process is complicated but possible, especially if there are medical indications such as dementia or other cognitive impairments. Another letter from the real estate agent with a preliminary appraisal of the apartment. The amount makes me whistle. Real estate in our neighborhood has risen sharply in recent years. This is no longer the modest apartment that Walter and I bought 30 years ago. I put down my tablet, my hands shaking. I can't wrap my head around the fact that Merritt is planning to have me declared incompetent, take custody of me, and apparently sell the apartment. My sister-in-law has always been cold, but I never expected this from her. When I hear the sound of a car engine in the yard, I quickly put the tablet back in its place and go to my room. A few minutes later, the door slams, and I hear children's voices and footsteps. "Grandma, look what I found!" Lynette bursts into the room, holding an old porcelain doll in her hands. "Dad bought it at a flea market." "It's beautiful," I smile, even though I'm still stormy inside. "It looks like the one I had when I was a child." "Really? Where is it now?" Lynette's eyes light up. "I don't know, sweetie. It must have gotten lost during one of the moves." In fact, I know exactly where it is. in a box of old things that Merritt sent to the basement when they moved. "Why keep this junk?" she asked at the time. I didn't argue, even though that box contained not only the doll but also photo albums, letters from Walter, and souvenirs from our rare trips. "Mom says your room would make a great playroom for Oren and me," Lynette suddenly announces. "She says you only need a bed and all those shelves and cabinets are just taking up space." I feel my cheeks start to burn. So Merritt is already discussing with the children how to dispose of my room. "Is that so?" I say calmly. "And where does Mom think I'm going to live?" Lynette shrugs with childlike innocence. "I don't know, maybe in a nursing home? Jessica from my class says her grandmother was sent there when she started forgetting things and wetting herself." "I haven't forgotten anything yet, and I only go to the bathroom," I reply, trying to sound lighthearted. "So I think we can wait a while before moving into a nursing home." Lynette laughs, not noticing the bitterness in my words, and runs out of the room, clutching her new doll to her chest. All day long, I watch Merritt and Garrick, trying to figure out if her son knows about her plans. But Garrick, as usual, is lost in his own thoughts, barely answering questions, and immediately after dinner, he goes back to the garage. Oren locks himself in his room with his computer, and Lynette plays with her new doll in the living room under her mother's watchful eye. In the evening, as I'm washing the dishes after dinner, Merritt comes up to me. "Gwen, I wanted to ask you, you're seeing Dr. Levinsky about your ear, right?" "Yes, once every 6 months," I reply cautiously. "Why?" "I just thought, maybe you should get everything else checked out too. You know, at our age, we have to take care of our health." At our age. Merritt is 37, I am 65, but she says it as if we are the same age, both with one foot in the grave. "I'm fine," I reply. "Dr. Levinsky checks my blood pressure and heart every time. What about your memory?" She pauses. "Garrick said you sometimes forget where you put things. I almost dropped my plate." So that's what it is. They've already discussed my forgetfulness. "Everyone forgets things sometimes," I say evenly. "Garrick forgot to pay the electricity bill last month, but I'm not suggesting he be tested for dementia." Merritt blushes slightly. "I'm just worried about you, Gwen." "We're not getting any younger." "Thanks for your concern," I reply, returning to the dishes. "But I'm capable of taking care of my own health." Merritt opens her mouth as if to add something, but changes her mind and leaves the kitchen. Sunday passes in tense silence. I notice Merritt glancing at her watch every few minutes, as if waiting for something. After lunch, she suddenly announces that she's going to see a friend. "What friend?" Garrick asks, surprised. "You never mentioned any friends in Rockford." "I met her recently," she replies vaguely, "in line at the supermarket." Garrick shrugs. He's never been particularly interested in his wife's social life. But I feel that something is wrong here. In the 3 years we've been together, Merritt has never mentioned any new acquaintances. Through the open window, I see her get into a car parked outside the house. A middle-aged man in a business suit is behind the wheel. It doesn't look like a friendly meeting. When Merritt returns in the evening, she looks excited. She hums something while helping Lynette with her homework and even compliments Garrick on his shirt. Usually, this kind of behavior means she has good news. But for some reason, I have a feeling that this news won't be good for me. Late at night, I wake up to muffled voices. My room is next to the kitchen, and if I press my ear against the wall, the healthy one, of course, I can hear the conversation. I don't usually eavesdrop, but my intuition tells me that I should listen now. It's just crazy. It's Garrick's voice, sounding tired and irritated. "Do you even understand what you're proposing?" "I understand that we need to move on," Merritt replies. "We can't live in this cramped apartment forever. The kids are growing up. They need space." "And that's why you're meeting with realtors and lawyers behind my back?" So Garrick found out. I wonder how. Maybe Merritt let it slip in the heat of the moment. "I was just looking into options," Merritt defends herself. "The apartment is worth twice as much now as when your parents bought it. We could sell it, buy a bigger house, and still have enough left over for what?" Garrick's voice hardens. "To pay for a nursing home for my mother?" "Not necessarily a nursing home," Merritt replies quickly. "There are good retirement homes, with care and medical assistance. You can see it's getting harder for her to cope." "Cope with what?" Garrick interrupts. She's completely independent. She cooks better than you, by the way. She takes care of the house, helps with the kids. She's losing her hearing. Merritt raises her voice. She forgets things. The other day she left the stove on. What will happen in a year? In 2 years? We all get old, Garrick replies. But that's no reason to throw your parents out on the street as soon as they start causing inconvenience. I'm not talking about throwing her out on the street. Merritt sounds indignant. I'm talking about her needing professional care and us needing normal living conditions. God, Garrick, we're living in your childhood bedroom at 37. Is that normal? It's not normal to plan behind your mother's back how to get rid of her and take over her apartment, Garrick replies. God, Merritt, I never thought you were capable of this. What? Taking care of our family's future? Her voice becomes shrill. Yes, I met with a real estate agent. Yes, I looked into options for your mother. Because someone has to think about the future, and all you do is mess around with your junk in the garage. Don't change the subject. Garrick's voice is dangerously quiet. You plan to have my mother declared incompetent. I saw the letter from the lawyer. How could you, Merritt? Silence. Then, it was just a request for information. I just wanted to know. What? The easiest way to take an apartment away from an elderly woman? Garrick doesn't let her finish. My mother, who took us into her apartment when we didn't have a penny to our name, who gave us most of her space, who sits with our children, cooks, cleans, and in gratitude, you want to send her to a nursing home? Don't twist my words. Merritt's voice turns cold. I want her to be taken care of by professionals. And yes, I want our children to live in a normal bedroom, not a storage room converted into a room, so we can finally live like a normal family, not like refugees. If you don't like living here, the door is open, Garrick says. But my mother is staying in her home, and I'm staying with her. What does that mean? Merritt's voice sounds frightened. Are you choosing her over us? I'm choosing not to throw an elderly person out of their home for my own benefit, Garrick replies. And if you can't understand that, then I don't know what we're doing together. I hear the sound of a chair being pushed back, then footsteps. The door slams. Garrick must have left the kitchen. I quickly move away from the wall and climb into bed, my heart pounding like crazy. My son has taken my side. My quiet, submissive Garrick, who always went with the flow and avoided conflict, suddenly showed some backbone. He stood up for me. Maybe all is not lost. I lie awake all night thinking about what I heard. So Merritt really was planning to get rid of me, and Garrick found out about it. But what now? Will everything stay the same, or will the conflict escalate? On Monday morning, the atmosphere in the apartment is tense. Merritt and Garrick barely speak to each other, exchanging only necessary phrases about the children and household matters. The children sense the tension. Orrin withdraws even more into himself, and Lynette becomes moody and tearful. I pretend not to notice, but inside I'm boiling with emotion. Part of me wants to go to Garrick, hug him, and thank him for protecting me. Another part is afraid to interfere, lest it make the situation worse. In the afternoon, when Merritt goes shopping and the children are at school, Garrick comes into my room. "Mom, we need to talk, he says, sitting down on the edge of my bed. "About what, son?" I pretend not to understand. "About Merritt. About her plans for the apartment." He rubs his nose, a gesture he only makes when he's under a lot of stress. "I found a letter from the lawyer. She wanted to have you declared incompetent because of your hearing problems, to take custody and dispose of the apartment." I nod, pretending not to be surprised. There's no point in pretending. "I know," I say calmly. "I saw Caleb's message and her search on the internet." Garrick looks stunned. "And you didn't say anything?" "What was I supposed to say?" I shrug. "Hey, I know your wife wants to put me in a nursing home and sell my apartment. I didn't want to put you in an even more difficult position." Garrick looks at me for a long time, then shakes his head. "You've always done that. You've always put me first, even when I didn't deserve it." "You're my son," I say simply. "Of course I put you first." "I didn't always put you first." His voice trembles. "I should have known what was going on. I should have noticed how Merritt treated you, how she spoke to you. You were busy trying to survive," I replied gently. "Losing your job, trying to support a family, looking for a new opportunity. That doesn't leave much time for observation." "That's no excuse." He shakes his head. I talked to Merritt. I told her I wouldn't let her kick you out of your apartment. I heard, I admit. Not everything, but enough. Garrick blushes. I'm sorry you had to hear that. But I want you to know that I'm on your side. I always have been and always will be. I know, son. I squeeze his hand. What now? I don't know. He looks lost. Merritt, she wasn't always like this. When we first met, she was different, caring, cheerful. But then, when the money problems started, when we had to move here, she changed. Difficulties reveal a person's true nature, I say. They don't create it. They just remove the mask. Garrick is silent, thinking about my words. Then, I love her, Mom. No matter what. She's the mother of my children. I know. I nod. And I'm not asking you to choose between us. I never will. But maybe we should think about other options, he says cautiously. Maybe it's time for Merritt, the kids, and me to find a place of our own. You could have the whole apartment to yourself again, and we— You're barely making ends meet, I interrupt. How are you going to pay for a place? I'll find a job, he says with new determination in his voice. A real job, not odd jobs. If I have to, I'll go work for Caleb as an administrator. It's not what I dreamed of, but it's a job, I finish for him. And if it helps your family— Our family, he corrects me. You're part of our family too, Mom, and I won't let Merritt or anyone else treat you like you're a burden. I feel tears welling up in my eyes, but I hold them back. This is no time for sentimentality. Let's not rush into any decisions, I say. Talk to Merritt. Try to find a compromise. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing, for our family to be happy. Garrick nods, but I see the doubt in his eyes. He's no longer sure Merritt wants the same thing. After he leaves, I sit on the bed, staring out the window. Over the past 3 years, I've gotten used to the constant presence of other people in the apartment, to the sounds, the smells, the feeling that I'm not alone. Going back to being alone. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But on the other hand, it's better to be alone than to feel like a stranger in my own home. In the evening, Merritt returns from school with the children. She's clearly in a bad mood. She slams doors and snaps at Oren when he asks for help with his homework. Then she notices me in the kitchen and freezes. Gwen, she says tensely, can I talk to you? Sure, I say, drying my hands on a towel. Kids, go to your rooms. Your mom and I need to discuss some adult matters. Oren and Lynette leave without protest, sensing the tension. Garrick said he talked to you, Merritt begins when we are alone. Yes, I confirm. He told me about your plans. They weren't plans, she says, making quotation marks with her fingers. I was just exploring options, for your own good. Declaring me incompetent and sending me to a nursing home is for my own good? That's a strange concept of good, Merritt. You don't understand, she begins, pacing the kitchen. We can't live like this forever. The kids are growing up. They need their own space. Garrick deserves a normal life, not eternal gratitude for letting his mother live in her apartment. And your solution is to kick me out and sell my apartment? Not kick you out. She raises her voice. To provide you with proper care. You're losing your hearing. You're becoming forgetful. I've been losing my hearing for 20 years, I reply calmly. That doesn't make me incapacitated, and I'm not more forgetful than you, Merritt. You just prefer to see what you want to see. She looks at me with undisguised anger. You're turning Garrick against me. You've always done that. You've always come between us. I didn't say anything to Garrick, I reply evenly. He found your correspondence with the lawyer himself. He drew his own conclusions. And now he's threatening to leave me if I don't stop making plans for you, she almost shouts. Are you happy now? You're destroying our family. I didn't plan to kick a family member out of his home, I reply, still calm, even though I'm boiling inside. I didn't discuss with the children how to convert Grandma's room into a playroom while she was still living there. Merritt turns pale. Did Lynette tell you? Children can't keep secrets, Merritt, and they often repeat what they hear from their parents. She sinks into a chair, suddenly losing all her enthusiasm. What's going to happen now? I don't know, I answer honestly. It depends on you, on Garrick, on whether you can find a compromise. What compromise? She looks at me wearily. Either we continue to live here, cramped, forever dependent on your kindness, or what? I wait for her to continue. Or we leave, she says quietly. Garrick says he'll find a job, that we'll rent a place, but we both know that's not realistic. Not with his experience, not with the current job market. I look at my sister-in-law, and for the first time in a long time, I see her not as an adversary, but simply as a tired, disappointed woman who dreamed of a different life. There's always a way out, I say, but it requires honesty and respect for all members of the family. Merritt looks up at me. What do you suggest? Let's wait for Garrick, I reply, and discuss everything together as a family. She nods, and we sit in silence, waiting for my son to return. A difficult conversation lies ahead, one that will determine the future of our family, and I'm ready for it, ready to fight for my right to live with dignity in my own apartment, ready to help my son and his family, but not at the cost of my self-respect. I will no longer be invisible in my own home. I will no longer pretend not to hear the whispers behind my back. It's time to remind everyone, and myself, first and foremost, who I am and what I'm worth. The clouds over our family had been gathering all week. After my conversation with Merritt in the kitchen, there was a strange lull. Everyone pretended that nothing was happening, but the tension was palpable in every gesture, every word. Garrick was quieter than usual, as if afraid that any careless word might cause an explosion. Merritt, on the contrary, was busier than usual, asking with exaggerated concern if I needed anything or if anything hurt. Such ostentatious attention was more annoying than outright hostility. The children absorbed the atmosphere of the apartment like sponges. Orrin withdrew into himself even more, hardly leaving his room. Lynette became moody, often crying for no apparent reason. I tried to pay more attention to them, but that only angered Merritt. She saw my concern as an attempt to win the children over to my side. On Friday evening, Garrick announced unexpectedly, "We're having a barbecue on Sunday. The weather is supposed to be nice, and we haven't spent time together as a family in a long time." Merritt looked surprised, but quickly agreed. The children perked up. Barbecues were always a treat for them. "Let's invite Norman and Helen," Garrick added. "They've been asking when we're going to invite them over." Norman is Merritt's brother, although they don't look alike at all, nor do they have similar personalities. He's 3 years younger and works as an engineer for a construction company. His wife Helen is a quiet, pleasant woman who teaches at an elementary school. They don't have children, which has always been a source of superiority for Merritt, even though her brother's life has been much more successful than hers. "That's a great idea," Merritt smiled, and for a moment I saw the woman Garrick had brought to meet us 15 years ago, young, full of hope, with a sincere smile. When did she turn into this perpetually dissatisfied, envious person? Saturday was spent getting ready. Merritt was unusually lively, even humming something as she tidied up the apartment. Garrick went to the store for groceries, then pottered around in the garage, cleaning up the old grill. The children helped. Orrin washed the garden furniture, and Lynette hung paper lanterns in the yard. I prepared salads and marinated the meat. The small courtyard behind our house was rarely used. It was too cramped, squeezed between other buildings. But now, decorated with garlands, with chairs set out and a table covered with a bright tablecloth, it looked almost festive. In the evening, when the children were already asleep, I noticed Garrick and Merritt talking quietly in the kitchen. They weren't arguing, just talking. For the first time in a long time. Perhaps they had found some kind of compromise. Maybe everything would work out. Sunday turned out to be surprisingly warm for the beginning of autumn. The sun was shining so brightly, as if it had remembered the forgotten summer. Merritt and I had been preparing snacks since morning, and for the first time in a long time, we worked together without tension. She even shared a barbecue sauce recipe that she had kept secret. "It's a family recipe," she said, stirring the thick reddish-brown liquid. "My grandmother taught me. You need to add a little maple syrup. That's the secret ingredient." I nodded, trying not to show my surprise. Merritt had never talked about her family or her childhood. It was as if her life had only begun when she met Garrick. Norman and Helen arrived at noon with a bottle of wine and a homemade pie. Helen hugged me warmly, as always. "Gwen, you look beautiful," she said, and there was no falsehood in her eyes. "How's your ear? Merritt said you were having problems." "Same as usual," I replied. I can hardly hear anything in my left ear, but my right ear makes up for it. The main thing is to be able to see the person I'm talking to." Norman shook my hand, then gave Garrick a big hug. They always got along well, despite Garrick's difficult relationship with Merritt's older brother, Caleb. "Looking good, old man," Norman said. "Found a job yet?" "Not yet," Garrick replied. "But you have a couple of options." "Let me know if you need help." Norman patted him on the shoulder. "We sometimes have openings at the company. Not in your field, of course, but still." Merritt rolled her eyes, but said nothing. Garrick nodded gratefully. The barbecue began in a good mood. Garrick grilled the meat, the kids played ball in the far corner of the yard, and Helen and I set the table. Merritt bustled around, straightening napkins and refilling drinks. She was wearing a new dress, light blue with a floral print. Not the most practical for a barbecue, but it made her look younger and fresher. "That's a pretty dress," I remarked. "Thanks," she smiled, clearly pleased with the compliment. "I got it on sale. 70% off, can you believe it?" For Merritt, any purchase was always a source of pride if she managed to save money. Even when she and Garrick had money, she never paid full price. "Finding a discount is a talent," she liked to say. When everyone sat down at the table, the atmosphere was almost perfect. The sun was shining, the food was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Norman talked about a new project at work. Helen talked about her students. Merritt laughed at her brother's jokes. Garrick leaned back in his chair, relaxed. Even Orrin put down his phone and joined the conversation. "How are things with you, Gwen?" Norman asked, helping himself to some salad. "Merritt said you're thinking about going back to shoe design?" I glanced at my sister-in-law in surprise. She had never shown any interest in my previous job, let alone discussed with her brother the possibility of my returning to it. "She just mentioned that you were a shoe designer," Merritt explained, noticing my look, "and that handcrafted items are becoming more valued these days." "I've been thinking about it," I replied cautiously, "but I'm not sure now is the right time." "Why not?" Norman asked. Helen recently read an article about the revival of interest in traditional crafts. People are willing to pay more for handmade items. "That's true," Helen confirmed. "My school even introduced traditional craft lessons. The children learned to sew, knit, and work with wood." "See, Mom," Garrick interjected, "I told you it might be a good idea." I felt an unpleasant suspicion growing inside me. Why was everyone suddenly talking about me going back to work? Had they been discussing it without me? "I have arthritis," I said, showing my hands with their crooked fingers. "I'm not sure I can work as well as I used to." "But you helped me make shoes for my doll last week," Lynette pointed out, "and they turned out great." "That's different, sweetie," I smiled. "Real shoes require precision and strength in your hands." "Come on, Mom," Garrick said. "Think about it. It could be extra income." That's what it was, extra income. So I wouldn't have to rely so much on my pension, so I could rent my own place and move out of my apartment. "I'll think about it," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Even now, even after everything that had happened, all they could think about was money. The conversation moved on to other topics. Garrick brought more meat from the grill, Merritt poured wine. Norman told a funny story about a colleague who came to work wearing different socks. Everyone laughed, even me, although I felt heavy inside. When it was time for dessert, Helen helped me bring the pie and coffee from the kitchen. As we set the cups on the table, she asked quietly, "Are you okay, Gwen? You seem upset." "I'm fine," I replied automatically, "just a little tired." "I understand," she nodded. "On your feet all day, it's not easy at your age." At your age. Why does everyone feel the need to remind me of my age? As if after 60, a person automatically becomes frail and useless. We returned to the table. Helen cut the pie, and I poured the coffee. When I reached over to fill Merritt's cup, I misjudged the distance, my arthritis was acting up, and knocked over the gravy boat. Thick, reddish-brown liquid splashed onto Merritt's light blue dress. There was a moment of silence. Merritt froze, staring at the spreading stain. "I'm sorry," I said, quickly grabbing a napkin. "I didn't mean to—" "Don't touch it." Merritt pushed my hand away. "You'll just smear it." "I can help," Helen offered, "if you wash it out right away with cold water." "No." Merritt stood up, still staring at the stain. "I'll do it myself." She went into the apartment. We all looked at each other, not knowing what to say. It was an accident, I said, feeling the need to explain. I really didn't mean to. We know, Gwen, Norman replied gently. Don't worry about it, it's just a dress. Besides, she bought it on sale, Garrick added, trying to lighten the mood. 70% off. No one laughed. The joke was as awkward as the whole situation. A few minutes later, Merritt returned, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Her face was tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. The stain won't come out, she said, sitting down at the table. I'll have to take it to the dry cleaners. I'll pay for it, I offered quickly. Of course you will, she replied with unexpected anger. It's the least you can do. Merritt, Garrick said warningly. It was an accident. An accident? Merritt turned to him. Like the stove being left on last week? Like the vase that broke a month ago? How many accidents have to happen before we admit the obvious? What are you talking about? Garrick frowned. About your mother becoming dangerous, Merritt said, no longer holding back. She's deaf in one ear, her hands shake, she forgets to turn off the stove. How long are we going to pretend everything is fine? Merritt? Norman put his hand on his sister's shoulder. Calm down. You're exaggerating. I'm exaggerating? She shook his hand off. You don't live here. You don't see what happens every day. How she drops things. How she forgets what we just talked about. How... Enough, Garrick said firmly. You're going too far. I'm going too far? Merritt raised her voice to a shout. I'm trying to protect our family. And you just turn a blind eye to everything because she's your mother. Merritt, please, Helen intervened. The children are listening. Orrin and Lynette were indeed frozen in the corner of the yard, looking at us fearfully. But Merritt couldn't stop herself. Let them listen. She jumped up from her chair. Let them know the truth, that their grandmother is a burden, that we live in cramped quarters because of her, that all our problems are because of her. That's not true, I said quietly. You live in my apartment. I took you in when you had nowhere else to go. In your apartment? Merritt turned to me, her eyes burning with rage. Yes, it's your apartment, and you never let us forget it. Every day, every minute, we have to be grateful to you for a roof over our heads. Generous Gwen, saintly Gwen. Merritt, stop. Garrick stepped between us. You're saying things you'll regret. No, I won't. She pushed him away. I've kept this inside for years. For years I've put up with her condescending looks, her advice, her constant presence. I wanted a home of my own, a family of my own, a life of my own. Instead, I'm stuck here with a woman who thinks I'm not good enough for her precious son. I never thought that, I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I've always treated you like a daughter. Don't lie, Merritt almost shouted. You always looked down on me, always criticized my choices, my decisions. Always the perfect mother, the perfect housewife, the perfect everything. And me, I was never good enough. That's not true, I shook my head. I never... Shut up! Merritt slammed her fist on the table, causing the cups to jump. Just shut up! You're only still living here because we tolerate you. If it weren't for the children who need a babysitter, I would have sent you to a nursing home long ago. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the ground slip away from under my feet. Everyone stared at Merritt in shock. Garrick, Norman, Helen, the children. But she didn't seem to notice, continuing to stare at me with hatred. We're leaving, Norman said, standing up and taking Helen by the hand. Merritt, you need to calm down. Call me when you're ready to talk calmly. They said goodbye quickly and left. The children ran into the house, clearly frightened. The three of us remained, me, Garrick, and Merritt, still breathing heavily with anger. You've crossed the line, Garrick said quietly to his wife. This is my home, my mother, and I won't let you. Your home? Merritt laughed bitterly. It's her house, her apartment, and she'll never let us forget that. She'll never let us live our lives. If you're so unhappy here, maybe you should leave, Garrick said calmly, but his eyes were cold. Take the children and find a place where you'll be happy. Without me. Without my mother. Merritt froze, looking at him in disbelief. You're choosing her over me? Over your children? I'm choosing not to live with a person who is capable of telling my mother that she only lives in her own apartment because we tolerate her, Garrick replied. I don't recognize you, Merritt. I don't know when you became so cruel. She was silent, stunned. Then she turned and quickly went into the house. Garrick and I were left alone in the yard, surrounded by half-eaten dishes and half-drunk wine. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, coming over and hugging me. I didn't know she felt that way. I didn't know things were that bad. "It's okay," I replied automatically, though inside I was crumbling with pain. "She's just upset about the dress." "No," Garrick shook his head. "It's not about the dress. She's changed, Mom. And I didn't notice when it happened." I nodded silently. What could I say? We both knew it wasn't about the dress, or the cramped apartment, or my hearing, or my age. It was about disappointment, unfulfilled dreams, bitterness that had built up inside Merritt over the years and finally burst out. "I'll talk to her," Garrick said. "When she calms down. Right now, let's clean this up." We silently gathered the dishes, the leftover food, and stacked the chairs. The evening that had started so well ended in disaster. But strangely, I felt relieved. Finally, everything had been said out loud. No more pretending that everything was fine. No more pretending that we were a happy family. When we returned to the apartment, Merritt was sitting in the living room with the children, quietly explaining something to them. When she saw us, she fell silent and went into the bedroom without saying a word. The children looked confused and frightened. "Everything will be fine," Garrick told them, although his face showed that he didn't believe it himself. "Mom is just upset. It happens." Orrin nodded doubtfully, and Lynette clung to her father for comfort. I quietly went to my room, feeling that my presence would only make the situation worse. Closing the door, I sat down on the bed and allowed myself to cry for the first time in a long time. Not loudly, not sobbing, just quiet tears rolled down my cheeks as I remembered Merritt's words. "You're only still living here because we tolerate you." Was that really true? Was I just an unwanted guest in my own apartment, tolerated out of kindness? When my tears dried up, I felt a strange calmness. It was as if something inside me had broken and then put back together again, but in a different order. I got up and pulled an old wooden box from under the bed where I kept important documents. Among the yellowed papers, I found what I was looking for: the deed to the apartment. My name was there, next to Walter's. No other names. This apartment belonged to me and me alone. I stared at the document for a long time, remembering how Walter and I had scrimped and saved to pay off the mortgage. How happy we were when we made the last payment. How we planned for this apartment to be our refuge in our old age. Walter didn't live to see old age, but the apartment remained, the only material evidence of our life together, of our love. And now my sister-in-law thinks I'm only living here because they tolerate me? In my own home? I took out my phone and found the number of Wilma Thornton, my old friend, a former notary public. We hadn't seen each other in years, but we sometimes called each other on holidays. Wilma had always been practical and knew how to protect her interests. It was rude to call so late, but I felt I wouldn't be able to sleep unless I talked to someone who was on my side. To my surprise, Wilma answered after the second ring. "Gwen?" Her voice sounded surprised, but not sleepy. "What's wrong?" "Sorry for calling so late," I said. "Are you awake?" "At my age, sleep is a luxury," she chuckled. "I'm watching a rerun of Law and Order. Is something wrong?" I briefly told her about the situation, about Merritt's plans, about today's scandal, about how I felt like a stranger in my own home. "What a bitch," Wilma commented bluntly. "I'm sorry, Gwen. I know she's your son's wife, but I don't know what else to say." "I understand," I sighed. "But what am I supposed to do? I don't want to kick my own son out of the house." "What about his wife?" Wilma asked bluntly. I paused, not knowing how to respond. Part of me wanted Merritt to disappear from my life forever, but I knew that was impossible. She was the mother of my grandchildren, my son's wife. "Listen," Wilma continued, not waiting for a response. "This apartment is yours. You can do whatever you want with it. Let whoever you want live there, on your terms. But first, you need to regain control." "How?" "Come over tomorrow," she suggested. "I'll look at your documents and we'll talk to a lawyer I know. You have options, Gwen, and none of them include putting up with disrespect in your own home." We agreed that I would come over in the morning. After saying goodbye, I felt a determination growing inside me. For the first time in a long time, I knew I was doing the right thing, that I was defending not only my property, but also my dignity. I went to bed, but sleep would not come. I could hear muffled voices through the wall. Garrick and Merritt were arguing. I couldn't make out the words, only the intonation. His calm and reasonable, hers sharp and accusatory. Then a door slammed. One of them had left the bedroom. Judging by the heavy footsteps, it was Garrick. The sofa in the living room creaked. He had decided to sleep there. I closed my eyes, but in my mind's eye, I could still see Merritt's face contorted with anger, hear her words. "You're only still living here because we tolerate you." The phrase spun around in my head like a broken record, keeping me awake. At some point, I realized that I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't pretend not to notice the contemptuous glances, not to hear the cutting comments, not to feel the atmosphere of hostility. It was time to change something. It was time to remember who I really was. Not a helpless old woman, as Merritt thought, not a burden as she tried to convince my son, but a woman who had been through a lot and survived. A woman who knows the value of hard work, love, and respect. A woman who won't let anyone, not even her own family, decide her fate. In the morning, I got up before everyone else, packed a small bag with the essentials, and wrote a short note to Garrick. "Going to Wilma Thornton's. I'll call later. Don't worry. Love you, Mom." As I left the apartment, I glanced back at the closed bedroom door where Merritt was sleeping. Part of me wanted to go in, wake her up, and tell her everything that had built up over the years. But I held back. Now was not the time for emotions. Now was the time for action. I quietly closed the front door behind me and walked to the bus stop. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I was doing and why. This apartment was mine. My roof, my rules. And it was time to remind everyone, including myself, of that. Wilma Thornton lived in an old 2-story house on the opposite end of Rockford. I used to visit her often. We had been friends for over 30 years, ever since we worked together at a shoe factory. Then Wilma trained as a notary, and I stayed on making shoe lasts. Our paths diverged, but our friendship remained. In recent years, we had seen each other rarely. After retiring, Wilma had taken up gardening and spent a lot of time at her cottage outside the city. We would call each other on holidays and sometimes exchange cards, but I knew I could count on her in a pinch. "My goodness, Gwen, you've lost weight," was the first thing Wilma said when she opened the door. "Are you still feeding that ungrateful family at your own expense?" I smiled. Wilma was never known for her tact. She called a spade, which many considered harsh, but I always appreciated her directness. "Come on, let's go to the kitchen," she commanded. "I made coffee and baked your mother's blueberry pie. Remember you gave me the recipe 20 years ago?" "I remember," I nodded, walking into the familiar kitchen, cozy and smelling of spices. "But I didn't think you kept it." "I keep everything," Wilma waved me off. "It's a professional habit. A good notary never throws anything away. Sit down and tell me everything." I told her everything. About how Merritt planned to have me declared incompetent and take custody of me, about yesterday's scandal, about how she said I only lived in my own apartment because they tolerated me. "Well, that was to be expected," Wilma said, pouring coffee. "I told you from the start that girl was rotten. Remember when Garrick brought her over to meet us? I said she had shifty eyes." "I don't remember," I admitted honestly. "But you never liked her, that's for sure." "Because I know people," Wilma said, pushing a plate of pie toward me. "Eat, you need your strength. I invited Edward Mitchell. He'll be here in an hour. He's the best housing lawyer in Rockford, by the way. And don't worry about his fee. He owes me for helping his daughter with her inheritance." "Wilma, I can't ask you." "You're not asking," she interrupted. "I'm offering. And you'll accept if you don't want to hurt an old friend." I smiled. Wilma always knew how to get her way. Edward Mitchell turned out to be a short, thin man in his 50s with a neatly trimmed beard and intelligent eyes behind round glasses. He listened to my story without interrupting, only occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "Show me the documents for the apartment," he asked when I finished. I took the title deed out of my bag and handed it to him. He studied it carefully, then returned it to me. "Everything is perfectly clear," he said. "The apartment belongs to you and you alone. Your son and his family have no rights to it. Even though they've been living there for 3 years, I asked. Even if they've lived there for 30 years, Mitchell replied. Without documents proving the transfer of ownership, they are merely guests in your home. Guests whom you have the right to ask to leave at any time. But what if... I hesitated, not knowing how to phrase it. What if they try to prove that I'm incompetent because of my hearing or age? Hearing loss in one ear is not grounds for declaring someone incompetent. Mitchell shook his head. That requires serious mental impairment confirmed by a medical board. Unless you have been diagnosed with dementia or a similar condition, no one can take away your legal capacity against your will. I felt the weight on my heart lift a little. So Merritt's plan was doomed from the start. But she might not have known that. She might have genuinely believed she could have me declared incompetent because of my hearing problems. What do you recommend I do? I asked. That depends on your goals, Mitchell replied. Do you want them to move out? I thought about it. Did I want my son, his wife, and my grandchildren to leave my apartment? Part of me screamed yes. I was tired of the disrespect, the constant tension. But another part remembered how hard it was for Garrick to find a job, how difficult it would be for them to find a place to live with 2 children. I want to be respected, I said finally. I want them to recognize that this is my apartment and that I have a say in what happens here. I want to be treated like I'm not on my deathbed. Mitchell nodded. In that case, I recommend a formal eviction notice. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll have to evict them, but it will let them know you're serious and that you know your rights. What if they refuse to move out? Then we'll file a lawsuit, he replied simply. But it doesn't usually get that far. Most people, once they receive a formal notice, prefer to settle amicably. We drafted the notice. Mitchell explained that by law I had to give them 30 days to move out, but we could specify a longer period if I wanted to give them time to find another place to live. 2 months, I decided. That should be enough time for Garrick to find a job and rent an apartment. Or for them to apologize and agree to new terms with you, Mitchell remarked with a slight smile. Remember, the goal is not to throw them out on the street, but to set boundaries and restore respect. I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. When Mitchell left, Wilma and I sat in the kitchen for a long time discussing the situation. You can stay with me until things settle down, she offered. The guest room is always available. Thank you, I squeezed her hand, but I have to go back. It's my home, and I'm not going to run away from it. Then I'll go with you, Wilma said firmly. I don't want that shrew attacking you when you hand her the notice. I didn't argue. Wilma's presence could really help keep the situation under control. We arrived at my apartment around 3 in the afternoon. I knew Garrick was usually home at that time. He had a job interview in the morning, and the kids came home from school at 3:30. Opening the door with my key, I immediately heard voices coming from the living room. Garrick and Merritt were arguing, unaware of our arrival. I don't understand where she could have gone. Merritt's voice sounded irritated. And why isn't she answering her phone? Maybe because you told her yesterday that she only lives in her own apartment because we tolerate her? Garrick replied dryly. I wouldn't want to talk either after that. I was upset about the dress, Merritt almost shouted. That's not what I meant. Yes, that's exactly what you meant. Garrick was unusually firm. You've thought that for a long time. I saw your letters to the lawyer, your internet searches. You planned to get rid of my mother so you could take her apartment. I planned to give her a decent retirement, Merritt defended herself. With professional care, medical assistance, by selling her apartment, Garrick finished. The apartment she paid for over 20 years. The home she took us into when we had nowhere else to go. I decided it was time to intervene and cough to get their attention. Garrick and Merritt turned around at the same time. Relief flashed across my son's face, while Merritt's expression changed from irritation to a forced smile. Gwen! She stood up from the couch. We were so worried. Where did you go? I left a note, I replied calmly, and I had my phone with me. I just didn't want to talk. Mom, Garrick came over and hugged me. Are you okay? Yes. I pulled away and introduced Wilma. Do you remember my friend? Wilma Thornton, she used to be a notary. Of course. Garrick shook Wilma's hand. It's good to see you again. Merritt said hello too, but her smile became even more strained. She clearly remembered that Wilma had never hidden her disapproval of her. "I have something for you," I said, taking the envelope with the notice out of my bag. "This is an official eviction notice. You have 2 months to find another place to live." There was a moment of silence. Garrick stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Merritt turned pale, then red. "You can't do this," she finally said. "This is our apartment. We've lived here for 3 years." "It's mine," I corrected her. "I let you live here when you had nowhere else to go. But after yesterday, it's clear that this isn't working anymore." "Mom," Garrick looked shaken. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," I nodded. "I consulted a lawyer. The apartment belongs to me and me alone. You have no rights to it. And I don't want to live somewhere where I'm just tolerated anymore." "But it was just a figure of speech." Merritt threw her hands up. "Said in anger. You can't kick us out on the street because of one phrase." "Not because of one phrase." I looked her straight in the eye. "Because of everything that came before it. Because of your plans to have me declared incompetent. Because of your conversations with the children about turning my room into a playroom. Because of how you've treated me all these years." Merritt opened her mouth, then closed it. Apparently, she hadn't expected me to know about her plans. "Mom, let's talk about this calmly." Garrick tried to take control of the situation. "I understand that you're upset. Merritt was wrong and she knows it. But eviction, isn't that a bit extreme? And plans to have me declared incompetent and sent to a nursing home aren't extreme?" I asked. "Son, I love you. I will always love you and your children. But I will no longer allow your mother to treat me like a burden in my own home. We can work this out," Garrick said quickly, feverishly. "Set rules, boundaries. Merritt will apologize. She'll behave differently." "I won't apologize," Merritt suddenly exploded. "That's ridiculous. We've lived here for 3 years, taking care of her, putting up with her whims, her deafness, her constant instructions on how we should live. And now she thinks she can just kick us out? We'll see what the court says." "The court will say the same thing I'm saying," Wilma replied calmly. "The apartment belongs to Gwen. You're living here with her permission. That permission has been revoked. You have 2 months to pack your things and find another place to live. We'll see." Merritt narrowed her eyes. "I have something that could change the situation." She went into the bedroom and returned with a folder. "Here," she said, throwing a piece of paper on the table. "A deed of gift. Gwen signed it 3 months ago when she had a flare-up of arthritis and needed money for medication. She agreed to transfer the apartment to us in exchange for lifetime support." I stared at the document in shock. My signature was indeed at the bottom, although I had never signed anything like this. "This is a forgery," I said, feeling myself go cold inside. "I never signed this document." "Of course you did," Merritt smiled smugly. "You just forgot. You forget a lot of things these days, don't you, Garrick?" Garrick looked at his wife in horror. "What have you done, Merritt? What was necessary?" She crossed her arms over her chest. "For our family, for our children. They need a normal home, not this cramped apartment where we all live like sardines." Wilma took the document and studied it carefully. "It's invalid," she said finally. "First, a real estate deed must be notarized. Second, even if it were notarized, the signature is clearly forged. I was a notary for 30 years. I know what a forgery looks like." "You can't prove anything." Merritt looked less confident now, but she was still holding her ground. "It'll be your word against mine." "And the word of a handwriting expert," added Wilma, "who will easily determine that the signature is forged. Do you know what happens for forging documents, Merritt? Prison time." Merritt turned pale. Garrick looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "You forged my mother's signature?" he asked quietly. "You really did that?" "I did it for us," Merritt almost shouted. "For our family. So we could finally have a place of our own. So we could live a normal life." "By lying? By forging documents?" Garrick shook his head. "I don't recognize you, Merritt. I don't understand when you became like this." At that moment, the front door opened and Orrin and Lynette rushed into the apartment, returning from school. They froze in the hallway, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Orrin asked, looking from one adult to the other. "Why are you shouting?" "Nothing, sweetie." Merritt quickly changed her tone to a gentle one. Just grown-ups talking. Go to your rooms. We'll call you when we're done. No, I said firmly. They need to know. Oren, Lynette, I've made a decision. You and your parents will need to find another place to live. You have 2 months. The children looked at me in confusion. Then Lynette ran up and hugged my legs. But I don't want to leave you, Grandma, she cried. I want to live with you. I felt my heart tighten. There it was, using children to manipulate. A classic move. But I couldn't be angry with Lynette. She really loved me in her own way. You can always come visit me, sweetheart, I said, stroking her head. But you need a home of your own. A home where you won't be cramped, where you'll each have your own room, see? Merritt said to the children. Grandma is kicking us out. She doesn't want us to live with her anymore. Don't exaggerate, Garrick said sternly. Children, go to your rooms. We need to talk to Grandma alone. Oren nodded and pulled his sister by the hand. They left, but it was clear they would be listening. Mom, Garrick turned to me. I understand how you feel. I really do. But please, let's find another solution. Don't kick us out, me and the kids. I noticed that he didn't mention Merritt. Apparently, his wife's forgery had been the last straw for him, too. I'm not kicking you out, Garrick, I replied softly. I just want to be respected in my own home. I want my rights to be recognized. I don't want them trying to have me declared incompetent and sent to a nursing home. I would never let that happen. Garrick looked genuinely upset. You know that, Mom. I know, I nodded. But I also know that you don't always notice what's going on around you. You've been too busy with your own problems to see how your wife treats me. Merritt stood silently, pale, her lips pressed together. She clearly understood that she had lost, but she wasn't going to give up. We're not leaving, she said finally. You can't throw us out on the street. That's cruel. You have 2 months, I repeated, more than enough time to find another place, and I'm not kicking you out onto the street. I'm asking you to respect my right to live in peace in my own apartment. I'll find a job, Garrick said firmly. Norman offered me a position at his company. It wasn't what I had dreamed of, but it was a steady income. We can rent an apartment. Merritt shot her husband a withering glance but said nothing. She probably realized that further objections would only make the situation worse. I'll leave this with you, I said, placing the envelope with the notice on the table. And I'll take this, I said, picking up the fake deed of gift, as proof, if we need to go to court. You won't do that, Merritt said quietly but threateningly. You won't send the mother of your grandchildren to prison. That's up to you, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. If you leave peacefully, I'll forget about this document. If not, well, I'll defend my interests by any means necessary. Wilma and I left, leaving Garrick and Merritt to digest the news. I felt drained, but strangely liberated. For the first time in a long time, I had done what I thought was right, without fear of hurting or upsetting anyone. You did the right thing, Wilma said when we stepped outside. Not everyone could stand up for themselves like that. I'm not sure I did the right thing, I admitted. Maybe you should have tried to compromise. What compromise? Wilma snorted. Continue living with a woman who forges your signature and plans to have you declared incompetent? Who said outright that she tolerates you in your own home? No, Gwen, you did everything right, and Garrick will understand that if he doesn't already. I nodded, feeling my confidence grow. Yes, I did the right thing. For the first time in many years, I felt powerful. Not physically, but morally. The power of a person who knows their rights and is willing to defend them. The strength of a woman who had been through a lot and survived. The strength of a mother who loved her son but would not let him or his wife decide her fate. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe Garrick would find a job and rent an apartment for his family. Maybe he and Merritt would break up. It's hard to maintain a relationship after such a betrayal. Maybe we would find a compromise that would allow us to live together, but on new terms, with mutual respect. But one thing I knew for sure, I would no longer be invisible in my own home. No more pretending not to hear the whispers behind my back. No more letting anyone say that I was just tolerated. Because this was my apartment, my roof, my rules. 2 months passed in a strange limbo. Garrick and Merritt were looking for a new place to live, and I was preparing for a life alone. We tried to avoid each other, coexisting in the same apartment like ghosts, appearing in common areas at different times, exchanging only the necessary phrases. The children sensed the tension. Lynette became tearful and Oren withdrew even more into himself. I tried to give them attention, but Merritt saw it as an attempt to win them over to my side, and that only made things worse. At the end of November, they finally moved out. Garrick found a job at Norman's company, not the management position he had dreamed of, but with a decent salary and prospects for advancement. They rented a small apartment on the other side of Rockford, not what Merritt was used to, but clean and bright with separate rooms for the children. On the day they left, Garrick hugged me awkwardly and promised to call. The children said goodbye reservedly, clearly not understanding why everything had changed. Merritt just nodded without looking me in the eye and left without saying a word. And so I was left alone in my apartment, which suddenly seemed too big, too empty. The objects that had been crammed together now seemed to have scattered to the corners, leaving bare spaces. The silence I had dreamed of was deafening. For the first week, I just wandered around the rooms, not knowing what to do with myself. My days used to be scheduled down to the minute. Make breakfast, tidy up, spend time with Lynette, go grocery shopping, make dinner. Now all those responsibilities were gone, leaving a gaping void. In the nursery, which had once been my and Walter's bedroom, there were still toys that Lynette had forgotten or couldn't take with her. I gathered them into a box, thinking I would take them with me the next time we met, but that meeting never happened. Garrick called but didn't come, and I didn't dare impose myself on him. At some point, I realized that I was just waiting for them to come back, for life to be filled with hustle and bustle again, even if it was unpleasant. Waiting as if the last 2 months had been just a pause, a temporary disruption, after which everything would return to normal. But that didn't happen, and it wasn't supposed to. I made that decision myself. I put an end to that life, and now I had to start a new one. I called the management company and ordered repairs. Nothing grand, just a fresh coat of paint on the walls, new curtains, a few rearrangements. But that was enough to start changing the apartment, to make it mine, not ours. I decided to paint the walls, which had previously been a dull beige blue, the color Walter had always wanted for our bedroom, but I had thought too bold at the time. Now that no one could tell me it was old-fashioned or impractical, Merritt's favorite arguments, I chose what I liked. Instead of the heavy curtains Merritt had hung for coziness, I bought light linen curtains that let the sunlight in. I rearranged the furniture to make it easier to move around with my arthritis. I put the family photos back on the walls that Merritt had hidden in boxes, considering them clutter. I cleared out the children's room completely and turned it into a workshop. I took my old leather working tools out of the attic and bought new materials. Shoe designer is a rare profession, especially now that most factories use computer modeling. But I knew there were still craftsmen who made shoes by hand, and they needed lasts. Through Wilma, I found the owner of a small shoe workshop in the city center, who was looking for an experienced designer to create custom lasts. The job wasn't full-time, more like a hobby, but it provided extra income and, more importantly, a sense of purpose and usefulness. I felt alive, active, and needed again. Not just an old woman who was tolerated, but a master of her craft, a person with unique skills and experience. In mid-December, when the first snow turned Rockford into a Christmas card, Wilma dropped in unexpectedly. "Are you still cooped up in there?" she asked, looking around the apartment critically. "Not a bad renovation, but you need to get out and see people, Gwen. You can't live just to work." "I do go out," I protested. "I go shopping to the library." "That's not going out," Wilma snapped. "That's a necessity. You need social interaction, a hobby, interests other than those leather things of yours." She took a brochure out of her bag and placed it on the table. "Pottery classes at the community center, twice a week, 2 hours each. They start after the new year. I've already signed us both up." "Wilma, I can't." "You can," she interrupted, "and you must. Otherwise, you'll turn into a recluse, and I'm too old to visit you in a mental hospital when you start talking to the furniture." I laughed for the first time in a long time. Wilma always knew how to tell the truth without hurting anyone's feelings. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll go to your classes, but don't you dare say I told you so when I like it." "I wouldn't dream of it." She smiled slyly. Now tell me, did your son call? Garrick really did call every week. At first, the conversations were tense. He clearly didn't know how to deal with what had happened or how to act around me. Then it got easier. He talked about his new job, how the kids were adjusting to their new school, the apartment they had rented. He didn't say much about Merritt. I knew from Wilma, who was in touch with Norman, that he and Garrick were going through a difficult period. Merritt had never come to terms with having to move out of my apartment, blamed me for everything, and demanded that Garrick choose sides. But he seemed to have finally learned to stand his ground. I didn't interfere. It was their life, their relationship. I had already done what I had to do. I had protected myself, my dignity, my right to live the way I wanted. The rest was out of my hands. A week after Wilma's visit, I woke up to a strange noise in the kitchen. At first, I panicked. Burglars? But then I heard a soft meow and calmed down. It was the cat. He must have gotten in through the open window. A striped cat with yellow eyes and a sullen face was sitting on the kitchen table. When he saw me, he didn't get scared or run away, but just twitched his tail slightly, as if to say, "Oh, it's you, all right." "Where did you come from?" I asked, looking at the uninvited guest. He was thin but not emaciated, with clean fur. He didn't look like a stray. Perhaps he belonged to a neighbor. I poured some milk into a saucer and placed it in front of him. The cat sniffed it, snorted contemptuously, and turned away. "Fussy," I smiled. "What would you like, Your Highness? I found some smoked fish in the fridge." I cut off a piece and offered it to the cat. He seemed to like it. He ate the fish with dignity, without even looking at me, as if I were just a servant. "Grumpy," I decided, looking at his dissatisfied face. "That's what I'll call you if you decide to stay." The cat blinked slowly and continued washing himself, apparently deciding that the name suited him. Grumble turned out to be the perfect companion for someone with hearing problems. He never spoke, except for the occasional demanding meow at feeding time, but he expressed his desires and moods with his posture, his gaze, and the movement of his tail. With him, there was no need to ask questions or strain to make out his words, and I could hear his purring even with my good ear, a deep vibration that penetrated straight to my heart. I checked all the missing cat posters in the neighborhood, but no one was looking for a tabby cat with yellow eyes. After 2 weeks of waiting, I officially adopted Grumpy and bought him a bowl, a bed, and a scratching post. He accepted these gifts with the air of a king graciously accepting tribute from his loyal subjects. The pottery classes started in January. I went to my first class with a heavy heart. It had been a long time since I had been in a new group, and on top of that, I had my hearing problems. But it wasn't as bad as I had feared. The teacher, a young woman with dreadlocks and tattoos, spoke loudly and clearly, always facing the group. There were only 6 people in the group, most of them women my age or older. I met Dorothy, a former school teacher, Elaine, an architect's widow, and Frances, who had been an accountant all her life and had now decided to take up art in her retirement. We quickly became friends, united not only by our interest in ceramics, but also by our similar life experiences. We had all suffered losses and faced the need to start life over at an age when most people are preparing to live out their days. I hate that word, live out your days, Frances said one day as we were drinking tea after class. My sister-in-law uses it all the time. At your age, you should just live out your days in peace. As if I'm 85 and dying. Mine said the same thing, I admitted, until I kicked her and her son out of my apartment. I hadn't planned to tell this story, but the words just came out. To my surprise, no one condemned me. On the contrary, the women expressed approval and even admiration. "It's about time," Elaine nodded. "I kicked my son out 3 months after he moved in with me and his family. I couldn't stand how they bossed me around in my own apartment. I didn't kick him out, but I set clear rules," added Dorothy. "My daughter and her husband live on the first floor, and I live on the second. We have separate entrances and separate kitchens. We only see each other when we want to, not because we have to." I listened to them and realized that I wasn't alone in my situation, that many women of my generation face the same thing. Difficult relationships with adult children, the struggle for independence and respect, and many find the strength to stand up for their rights without giving in to feelings of guilt or fear of loneliness. In February, Garrick showed up at my place unexpectedly. No warning, no call. He just showed up at my door on Saturday morning, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Hi, Mom," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside silently, letting him in. He entered, looked around, noticing the changes in the interior. "It's gotten brighter," he remarked. "New paint and curtains work wonders," I replied, gesturing for him to sit down. "Tea, coffee?" "No, thank you," he said, sitting down on the sofa, still avoiding my gaze. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to talk." I nodded and sat down opposite him, waiting. Grumpy, who had been dozing on the windowsill, jumped down and went over to Garrick, sniffing his shoes. "You have a cat?" my son asked in surprise. "Technically, he adopted me." I smiled. "His name is Grumpy." "Fitting name." Garrick smiled faintly, looking at the cat's sullen face. "Reminds me of someone from my childhood. Old Mr. Jenkins from the first floor," I suggested, remembering our former neighbor who was always complaining about the noise. "No, you," Garrick replied, finally meeting my eyes. "When you're upset, you have the same expression on your face." I snorted, not sure whether to be offended or laugh. "You came here to tell me I look like an angry cat?" "No," he sighed, becoming serious. "I came to apologize for everything, for not seeing how Merritt treated you, for letting us treat you like that in your own apartment." I was silent, giving him a chance to speak. I was so caught up in my own problems, losing my job, my debts, fixing my car, that I didn't notice what was happening right under my nose, he continued. Or maybe I didn't want to see. It was easier to pretend that everything was fine, that we were just living together temporarily, helping each other out. "We did help each other," I said. "I gave you a place to stay when you had nowhere else to go. You helped with household chores when it was hard for me to manage on my own. But it wasn't equal." Garrick shook his head. "You gave us most of your apartment, your life, and we took it for granted, especially Merritt." I remained silent again. There was no point in pretending it wasn't true. "When we moved out, I finally saw it clearly," Garrick continued, "how we gradually pushed you into the background, how we pretended it was our apartment, not yours, how Merritt talked about you to the children, how she turned them against you." "She turned the children against me?" That was news to me. "Not directly." Garrick looked embarrassed. "But the constant comments about your age, your deafness, your forgetfulness, children absorb things like that. Especially Orrin. He started avoiding talking to you because Merritt kept saying it was pointless, Grandma can't hear you anyway." I felt a twinge of pain. I had noticed that Orrin had become more withdrawn with me, but I chalked it up to adolescence, a natural desire for independence. The thought that Merritt was deliberately distancing him from me was bitter. "Things are different now," Garrick added quickly, noticing my expression. "I talked to the kids a lot after we moved. I explained that your hearing problems don't make you any less smart or capable, that you have a right to respect and attention. And they understood? Lynette understood right away. She misses you, by the way. She keeps asking when we're going to visit Grandma." Garrick smiled weakly. "Orrin is more difficult. He's at that age when everything is seen through the prism of his own ego. But I think he's starting to understand, too." "And Merritt?" I asked the question that was hanging in the air. Garrick sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Merritt, it's complicated. She's still angry. She thinks you were cruel to kick us out. But deep down, I think she knows she was wrong. She just can't admit it out loud. I don't need her admission," I said. "All I want is respect. If not for me, then at least for my right to live with dignity in my own apartment." "I know," Garrick nodded. "And I wanted to ask, can we come over for Sunday dinner with the kids, like we used to?" My heart sank. All these years, even after Walter's death, Sunday dinners had always been a family ritual. We cooked together, discussed the past week, made plans for the future. "Of course," I replied. "You're always welcome here." "What about Merritt?" He looked at me with hope and fear at the same time. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to exclude Merritt from our family dinner after everything she had done. But another part understood that she was the mother of my grandchildren, the wife of my son. No matter how I felt about her, she was part of our family. If she wants to come and is willing to behave respectfully, I said finally, then yes, she's invited too. The relief on Garrick's face was almost palpable. Thanks, Mom, he said, taking my hand. This means a lot to me, to all of us. The following Sunday they arrived, Garrick, Merritt, and the children. Lynette immediately rushed to embrace me, while Orrin was more reserved but smiling nonetheless. Merritt looked tense but polite. She brought a bottle of wine and a cake, a gesture of peace that I appreciated. Thank you for inviting us, Gwen, she said, handing me the gifts. The apartment looks refreshed. Thank you, Merritt, I replied, accepting the gifts. I'm glad you could make it. It was a polite formality on both sides, but it allowed us to maintain our dignity and begin dinner without tension. We had prepared a simple meal, roast beef, salad, and apple pie for dessert. Not as fancy as Merritt liked, but hearty and delicious. At the table, Garrick talked about his new job, the children talked about school, and I talked about my pottery classes and new orders for shoe molds. Merritt was mostly silent, but when she spoke, she was polite and even pleasant at times. After dinner, Lynette asked to see my pottery. I took her to the workshop, where my first clumsy creations stood on the shelves. Crooked cups, uneven vases, funny figurines. Did you make all this, Grandma? Lynette asked admiringly. It's so beautiful. Thank you, dear, I smiled, touched by her enthusiasm. But I'm just learning. Look what my friend Elaine does. I showed her photos of Elaine's work. Elegant bird sculptures, delicate, almost transparent bowls. I want to learn too, Lynette said decisively. Will you teach me, Grandma? I'd love to, I nodded. If your parents let you come to my lessons. I'll bring her next Saturday, Garrick said, standing in the doorway. If you don't mind, of course. Not at all, I replied, feeling a warm sensation in my chest. My son was coming back into my life, and he was bringing my grandchildren with him, not as lodgers forced to put up with an old relative, but as guests who wanted to spend time together. As they left, Merritt lingered in the doorway. Gwen, she said quietly, I know things are complicated between us, and maybe they'll never be easy, but I want you to know that I won't get in the way of your relationship with Garrick and the kids. They love you, and they need their grandmother. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of my place in my family's life, and that was enough, at least for now. Thank you, Merritt, I replied. I won't interfere in your relationship with them either. After all, we all want the same thing, for them to be happy. She nodded, our eyes meeting for a moment, not as friends, not as family, but as two women willing to make peace for the sake of those they loved. When the door closed behind them, I didn't feel empty or alone. On the contrary, the apartment felt full, filled with memories, hopes, and plans for the future. Grumpy jumped onto the couch and curled up next to me, his purring a quiet lullaby. I realized I had found a new balance. It wasn't perfect or cloudless, but it was real. My family remained my family, despite all the conflicts and disagreements. But now we met on my terms, as equals, as people who respected each other's boundaries and dignity. The apartment that had once seemed like a prison, where I was superfluous, was now my refuge, my fortress, a place where I could be myself, not a grandmother, not a mother-in-law, not a deaf old woman, but simply Gwen Paxton, a woman who had been through a lot and survived, a woman who had finally learned to stand up for her right to respect and dignity, my apartment, my rules, my life.